It's a really cool event here to be able to talk about OTT and streaming and all that entails. To give you a little bit of personal background, I worked at ESPN for 9 years before Jamie offered me this incredible opportunity. He's always been a friend of mine, and now that he's my boss, it's even better. Because you want to have friends who are bosses and people you like and people you respect. And it's been a great opportunity for me. I think all of us here can speak to the fact, whatever your job is, you always want to be challenged. You want to try new things. You want to be able to express yourself. And the best characteristic of Jamie, I think, is he really allows people to be themselves. And whatever that may entail, if you want to fail once in a while, if you have an unorthodox way of thinking, he'd rather you try it and give it a chance. And I think too often we all realize in media and technology, there's too many people who would rather you just stick to the script, keep it simple, keep it straightforward, go from there. Jamie is one of those who likes to mix it up a little bit, and I think that's why this entire forum of streaming and being disruptive, I think it fits his MO. That's just my own psychological evaluation of Jamie. But
I appreciate you delivering that exactly the way I wrote it, so thank you.
Exactly. Jamie's official title is the Executive Vice President of Content, so he will tell you in self-deprecating terms that it's a lofty title, but basically he's running the show here, all right? He's very important, and we're going to talk for 30 minutes about a lot of things about DAZN, and I know people often like Q&As, as do I, but just because of time constraints, et cetera, if you find me and Jamie afterwards in the hotel, you want to have a quick conversation or a couple of questions, happy to do that, but we do have a lot to get to, so we're just going to fire away. First and foremost, DAZN, D-A-Z-N, Jamie, what's it all about?
That is the most common question we get. DAZN, for those of you who are unfamiliar, is just an app. It's just like Netflix, right? You download it on your phone, you can watch it on your smart TV. The preeminent difference between DAZN and Netflix is that we are a live sports streaming operation, right? Where Netflix is making entertainment and they're making it on demand. We are acquiring sports rights all over the world. We're now in 9 countries, and we're streaming them on our platform.
And so that's the part of it I think is interesting, is right away you say, okay, this isn't something located just in the U.S. This is an international phenomenon, so to speak.
Yeah, that's right. It actually launched in Japan in 2016. And I must admit, even as a sort of a consumer of sports, I wasn't altogether familiar with DAZN maybe 18 months ago. But it's an incredibly big deal internationally. It's made great inroads. It's one of the market leaders in Japan, in Germany, in Austria, and Switzerland. And it's had tremendous success globally. We are a new entrant in the United States. We're a little bit of an insurgent brand. And like we have in a lot of countries, the path to success is acquiring important sports rights in the local communities. And right now in the U.S., we're largely driven by boxing, Bellator, and baseball. And in full disclosure, it's mostly boxing in the U.S. right now, which I know you're intimately familiar with, as Adnan is a host on a lot of our preeminent boxing telecasts.
Right, so right now we're just focusing on sports with Bs. So baseball, boxing, Bellator, badminton is up next, in case you're curious. But Jamie's right, I get to host a baseball show called ChangeUp, which is a ton of fun. It's a whip-around nightly show. I think a lot of us know, or even if you have kids, or maybe you yourself have a little bit of ADD now when it comes to consuming content, and you say, I can't really just watch one game. I'd rather watch a bunch of different things. So with our baseball show, you're whipping around all night. It's 6 hours of all the games, all the highlights as they happen. Jamie mentioned the boxing. I'm thrilled to be hosting a lot of our big boxing events. Obviously, you know names like Andy Ruiz because of the upset over Anthony Joshua. That fight's coming up in Saudi Arabia. Canelo Alvarez is a huge name, obviously, within the sport of boxing, and also Gennady Golovkin. So with that being said, Jamie, in the U.S., like you said, it's a lot of focus on boxing right now. Is there an interest in acquiring other sports to add to the portfolio?
Yeah, that comes up a lot as people are sort of want to know the next step will be in the evolution of DAZN. And the answer to that is not dissimilar from something our global chairman, John Skipper, would have said when he was at ESPN. We are, of course, interested in acquiring the best sports rights that are available, right? We're in the business of serving sports fans, and so we want to acquire the preeminent rights. Our entry point ended up being boxing, probably for 2 reasons. One, the consumer was used to paying for boxing, right? The value proposition of when Canelo fights, I have to pay for that fight. That is something a consumer was used to. The other reason, in full transparency, was it was a way to get in at a high level of a sport in America, right? The sports rights are not just sitting around available to be purchased. You have to wait through rights agreements to come up, and then you have to bid for them. We had an opportunity to go get the most important boxer in the world and sort of put us on the map in the U.S. And that's really what led us to boxing. The baseball show that you do is almost a more interesting situation in that there really weren't baseball rights available per se. So we worked with our partners at MLB to come up with an original show to allow us to get into the baseball business domestically. And as you know, because we talked about it, when we first launched the show, the idea there was to replicate something that was incredibly successful in the NFL, which is red zone. And so the question was, what would the red zone look like in baseball? And I mean, you could probably tell me more than I can tell you.
Right.
It's a pretty fun experience.
Yeah, I think when it comes to baseball, whatever criticism of the sport may be, people say it's a little too slow or it's too regionalized. But this eradicates those criticisms because no matter what, we're whipping around to whatever the best action is. So to Jamie's point, you can be watching the Dodgers game and Clayton Kershaw's pitching, and then we'll go right to the Angels game. You can watch Mike Trout hit, and you want to if you say, I just want to see the major moments, that's what you're getting. You're literally trimming the fat of any sort of dead time in the sport, and you're getting the best moments. And that's why NFL Red Zone is so popular. I should mention, by the way, NFL Red Zone rights are in Canada. I'm Canadian, so a lot of my friends have DAZN because they're huge NFL fans. So NFL, Jamie, has really made big inroads in Canada and the Premiership. I mean, there's a lot of soccer fans in Canada as well. So I think that people don't realize, like you said, in DAZN in America can be fixated on boxing, but within North America, Canada specifically, soccer and the NFL are being controlled by DAZN.
Yeah, it's only a Google click away, but I agree that that's not well known. And sir, for our content team that oversees both the U.S. and Canada, some days it feels like we run two totally different businesses, right? So let's restate what Adnan said. In the U.S., we have a business driven by boxing, Bellator, and baseball. In Canada, we have the NFL, Champions League, and Premier League. Well, let's say most clearly, if you want to watch the Red Zone in Canada, you have to subscribe to DAZN. That's an incredible offering. It's highly valued, as we know how much DirecTV pays for it in the U.S. If you want to watch the Champions League, if you want to watch Premier League, you have to have DAZN. These are rights that we own exclusively. And what ends up happening, because you have to buy these sports rights in different territories, our Canada business feels very different than our U.S. business. Now, we're very lucky. There are some sports which we are able to own in various territories. We're able to own fighters like Canelo Alvarez, so we can put them all over the world. But generally, when you do rights deals, it is on a country-by-country basis. And the Canadian portfolio is incredibly impressive, and it's one of the reasons why it's grown so quickly.
Let's talk further about boxing specifically because, maybe some people might argue, okay, it's not one of the top 4 major sports in this country, but it's always been a major sport, and people always love the big fights. So again, DAZN, we've got the biggest fighters, as you mentioned, Canelo Alvarez specifically, and for your role specifically in charge of content, you've been really in charge of something called 40 days, and that's, I think, an extension of what other shows have tried to do, HBO 24/7, et cetera, but I think you're putting your personal stamp on this. And again, for a boxing fan, it's not enough to say, hey, the main event is this night, watch the fight. This is a way to really draw interest. Because for all sports, why is someone a big hockey fan or a big baseball fan, basketball, et cetera? You can know the backstories. You know the players, you know the transactions, you know about their families, you know what their brands are, et cetera. So in terms of boxing, I think in the past you'd have people say, I like that fighter a lot. I like a good fight. It's great. But what you're doing specifically with this show is learn more about these guys. And one thing I have found by working in the boxing space, these guys have tremendous backstories. I mean, every single person, you hear these guys talk, and you don't just stumble upon boxing. Marcus McDaniel's a fighter from Louisiana. He's been shot 7 times. Like literally, there's still 2 bullet holes in his body, and he's going out there to fight at Madison Square Garden. Like this isn't, a regular season game to respect Clippers Thunder. There's a lot at stake here for these guys. And these fighters, there's a fight between 2 female fighters in Las Vegas before the Canelo Alvarez fight. And to hear these women talk, the one woman's being trained by her dad, and they got emotional just talking about the fact father-daughter there in the ring together. And the other woman is talking about the fact she was training up until she gave birth. Like, I don't know what the extent of it was, but she's 9 months pregnant, and she's still trying to keep her body in shape, et cetera, because boxing's so important to her, and she wants to be able to fight in this fight. So just talk further about that, the stakes when it comes to boxing and what you're doing specifically in terms of content.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question, specific to this summit, because it speaks in some ways to the differences between how you look at content in a linear world and how you look at it in a streaming world. We generally look at content at DAZN in 3 distinct buckets. We look at content that can drive awareness, right, or consideration, a way to be aware that DAZN exists and the properties that are on there. The second bucket we look at is acquisition. that's largely live events, right? The reason that someone's going to sign up for DAZN primarily is going to be to watch the live fights or the live games. So that's, by the way, I'm saying in the order in which a consumer experiences, not in the order of its value, right? The acquisition, the live rights are the most important. And then the third bucket is retention, right? Once you're on the platform, how do we convince you to stay? And I think that early on, people probably would assume that our investment in original content would have been in retention programming. So let's use a real world example. They would have imagined that people would sign up to watch the Canelo fight on DAZN, and then we would make original content maybe about Canelo to convince you to stay on. Hey, we know you're an avid fan of Canelo. Please do not pause or cancel because we've made content made specifically for you. And in fact, we are going to go down that path. But since I told you the order, you have to have awareness first. So what we've actually done is we've taken our content and we've actually given it away for free. This is a very different strategy than you would see in linear, right? When we were at ESPN, we weren't making content to give away to other places. We were making content for ESPN, so people would watch ESPN. There's a different strategy. In streaming, what we're trying to do is we're trying to make compelling original content, give it away for free, so that you fall in love with our fighters, with our events, and thus want to sign up for it. And so to just bring it full circle to the question you asked, we took a series called 40 Days, a series which follows the fighter in the 8 weeks leading up to the fight. And we would team up with celebrities or influencers. So real world example, we went to Maverick Carter and LeBron James, and we said, we want you to do a docuseries called 40 Days following Canelo Alvarez and Danny Jacobs before their fight. And then they made that series, and we gave it away on YouTube. We gave it to NBC. We gave it to Facebook. We gave it to anyone who would take it. And then LeBron, as a partner, he would post on Twitter, you got to go watch my new show that's out there. And so then his 45 million followers are aware of it. That is all a process such that you consume that content, and your takeaway is supposed to be, oh, I'd be very interested in watching that fight. Now, how do I do that? Oh, that now I have to go sign up for DAZN to watch the actual fight itself. And we had great success. LeBron and Maverick were incredible partners, so we repeated that process again with Rock Nation and Meek Mill for the Anthony Joshua, Andy Ruiz fight. We then worked with Peter Berg and Mark Wahlberg for a Triple G's fight. We brought LeBron and Carlos Vela back for the last Canelo fight. So it's a model that has worked incredibly well to drive awareness.
And just to make it clear, what Jamie was saying for the non-fight fans, in the past, if you wanted to watch a fight, you'd pay $60, $70 for pay-per-view. What DAZN is offering is $20 a month to watch these fights. So it literally is a steal if you look at what other people were charging, what DAZN is offering, in addition to this content which he's discussing. Something else which is very exciting is One Night. That's going to have its premiere tomorrow night. And if I was to ask the room right now, someone said to me, who is the actor most synonymous with boxing? Give me a name. Throw it out there. Rocky, exactly. Logan Paul, good one too. Rocky, Sylvester Stallone, of course. And Sylvester Stallone is now going to be involved with DAZN, with boxing, with One Night, which again, I mentioned earlier, the Joshua Ruiz fight, which is taking place in Saudi Arabia, and now you've got Sly hooked up here.
Yeah, I'll tell you a quick 90-second story because we're so passionate about it and it has such a nice ending, that Anthony Joshua was an overwhelming favorite. When he came to Madison Square Garden in June. Andy Ruiz, without giving away the entire movie, was a last-minute replacement. A guy named Jarrell Big Baby Miller, who had failed a drug test. And this was supposed to be a walk in the park. It was a coronation for Anthony Joshua to take this British star and make the American audience fall in love with him. And I guess I shouldn't do a spoiler in case you want to watch the film. It didn't play out exactly like that.
But there's parallels, Jamie, to the real-life Rocky Balboa
In fact, there was. And we started sort of putting together the planning to do a 40-day series leading up to their next fight, the rematch in December. And as we were conceptualizing it, we realized there really was nothing that could happen in those 40 days leading up to the next fight that would be more interesting than the last fight. And so we sort of paused and said, well, before we venture into 40 days, is there another type of content that would serve the purpose of driving interest in the next fight? And we said, what if we just sort of did a documentary looking back at that fight? And generally, that's not done. Generally, the way docs on old fights are done is you look at fights that happened 20 years ago, right? Usually the passage of time is necessary for a proper perspective. But we had a slightly different goal here, right? It was driving awareness of the next fight. And we identified that that fight was so incredible, specifically because it had an incredible narrative, that was the Rocky story. And we called up Sylvester Stallone, and we told him what we were doing, and we said, there's no second candidate here. Like, we would love you to executive produce it. If you pass, then we'll just sort of do it ourselves. There's only one man associated with the Rocky story, and Stallone was amazing. And not only was he an executive producer and provided great name value and posting on social, but he actually got intimately involved in the project. He helped direct the interviews. He helped book Tyson and Evander Holyfield and added them to it. He was sending us many notes on the project, always helpful, never a problem. Music suggestions throughout, again, never a problem, always happy to do it. And it turned out, we're really proud of it. Deirdre Fenton, who works at DAZN, co-directed the film, was amazing. And we're both fortunate to have worked with Stallone on this, and he'll be on the red carpet at the premiere tomorrow night. It's a project of great passion to him, obviously, and it is in many ways the real life Rocky story.
Shouldn't be surprising that Stallone was that involved with it, because famously when he wrote the Rocky script, the studio said, okay, we'll pay for the script and we'll make it. No, I get to act in it. That's the only way you get to actually produce the movie. So he bet on himself, and I'm not surprised that to this day he's still involved with all aspects of it. He's always been a guy who's more than just an actor, more than a face. So that's good to know he's still involved. Other things we did with the boxing, and somebody mentioned Logan Paul, I think earlier. The Logan Paul KSI fight, which took place, Countdown was a part of that. Again, Jamie and I have ties to ESPN. I've worked there many years. So if you hear Countdown, maybe you think of NBA Countdown or ESPN College Game Day, those types of shows. But the Countdown that we did for Logan Paul KSI was something quite unique.
Yeah, and that's probably also interesting for a streaming conference as well. Generally, people had done, let's call them pre-game or pre-fight shows in the past, right? There's no reveal there that's sort of logical. What we found with that night with Logan Paul and KSI was that there was a whole card of boxing that night. And it was our belief that there was going to be a certain percentage of the audience that really just wanted to see Logan Paul KSI. And so for the rough math of it, let's pretend that they were going to fight at, 10 o'clock Pacific or whatever it was. And the idea was, well, what happens when we come on the air at 6 o'clock with the preliminary fights? What happens then? Well, generally in boxing, the pre-fight show ends. Right, so the night has started, and now it's a series of fights with some breaks in between, all leading up to the big event. And we thought, is that the best way to serve our potential KSI Logan Paul fans? And so as many streaming services do, we relied on research. So we went back and we looked at, they had a smaller fight in the UK maybe a year or so earlier. And what we found out was that 88% of signups for that fight, purchases for that fight, had happened in the 2 hours before the fight began. So think about all the press leading up to it, all the marketing, 88% of the buys are happening in those 2 hours. And so it sort of passed the rational test of we probably should be on the air, so to speak, talking about that fight in those 2 hours. And so we did something which we hadn't done before, which was we effectively ran a countdown show up against our own broadcast. So while DAZN was, these are funny words, call them on the air. When DAZN was on the air or streaming the preliminary fights, we had a totally different show being delivered on YouTube. And that totally different show was exclusively focused on Logan Paul KSI. In fact, that show stayed on the air up until Logan Paul began his ring walk. And that's what went off. And the idea of that countdown show, as the graphic said throughout, was, hey, we're giving you the previews, we're giving you the gambling angles, we're giving you the behind the scenes. If you want to watch the fight, you have to download the DAZN app and purchase it there. It was a very strategic way. And we're very proud of the show for sure. A famous boxer, Ryan Garcia, was on it. Kyle Brandt hosted it. It was an excellent show. It got something like 24 million views, at least in part because it was a good show for sure, but also we partnered with the fighters. Logan Paul and KSI gave us access to the YouTube page. And so that show itself was streaming on their page as well as ours throughout. And it became, someone mentioned this, I think, at YouTube yesterday, it became a little, certainly dorky and meta, but during the countdown show, we would show a split screen of the fighters in the locker room, and instead of fonting them, whatever their career record is or some note, we would note how many people were currently streaming the Countdown show on their platform. And so for them, it became like, please go watch it on my thing.
Right.
It became sort of a competition before it of who would consume it on whose platform.
Yeah, it was obviously a show targeted towards millennials, targeted towards people who are, I mean, these guys are Instagram, YouTube stars. I mean, this is very much, again, courting that younger audience, which we all know advertisers are always in love with, and that's something that DAZN has done a really good job of, especially with a fight like that. I mentioned our backstories. Obviously, Jamie and I both worked together at ESPN for many years. I'm just curious for you. You've worked at the highest levels. Again, for Jamie's background, if you know shows like First Take, if you know Sports Nation, Oberman, all those shows that he did. He also worked at Fox for a number of years. So, having been an executive at the highest levels at the most biggest, sports networks in this country, what's it like for you when you're navigating something which, as you mentioned earlier, is disrupting the sports landscape? How has that been different for you?
Yeah, listen, I think our global chairman, John Skipper, talks about it all the time. It's such an interesting challenge to be an insurgent now. So different from our previous experiences in linear television. I think there's a hope that coming soon is going to be a delivery of live sports content that might be different than you would see on linear. Right? Because we have the one-to-one relationship with the fan, there's an opportunity for us to do interactive gaming, to provide specific content that we know you're most interested in. And that's, when I say soon, very soon. These are things being contemplated and executed in real time. But right now, I think the difference between the offering on a DAZN or versus an ESPN or an FS1 is really the ease of use, right? You don't have to enter the cable bundle. You don't have to have a satellite dish installed on top of your house. Right? If you want to watch the Canelo fight, if you want to watch ChangeUp, it's just download the app and start watching it. And I think that's fundamentally of great value to the consumer. And I think that's at least part of the reason why OTTs like DAZN have found early success.
Yeah, it's obviously something very much out there right now. Disney Plus, HBO Max, Apple Plus. I mean, all these different companies are getting involved with that space. Has there been thoughts at all with regards to tiered pricing? Is there anything that you look into with that? Because that's another issue that people are discussing, at least with those venues.
Yeah, I think what's interesting, and we've contemplated a variety of different offerings. We give away a free month. I believe in every other country. The U.S. we started with that. Our first Canelo fight was actually given away for free. As it turns out, the consumer is quite smart. When it was given away for free, they signed up, watched the fight, and many of them left. And so we had to address that. And so that free month has gone away in the States. What I think is an interesting offering for us, as you mentioned, there's the $20 price point, to sign up for a month. People sometimes are confused. They say, so I'm buying the fight for $20? Like, I guess you can look at it that way. You're signing up for a month of DAZN for $20. But what's really the value is we offer an annual pass for $100. So that's, the math on that is $8.33 a month. That's an incredible offering. As you've said, Canelo, when he fought Triple G, people are paying, $85, $90 for one of his fights. So 2 Canelo fights a year was costing you $180. That was literally just to get you 2 awesome, but 2 Saturdays. What we're offering is $100 for an entire year of boxing content. That includes, of course, both Canelo fights and Triple G and Joshua and Ruiz and our baseball content. So it's an incredible value to the customer. I think the challenge for us is if we did a poll of this room and asked how many people understood that, we get a very low number of hands. It's getting the word out of what an incredible offering we have. And it impacted a marketing campaign we had this past fall where we started calling what we were offering fight season, trying to pass along the word. You don't have to look at it any longer of these one-off events that I have to pay $90 for. There's an ability here, go sign up the year for $100 and look at all of these fights. And that's a model that works quite effectively in team sports. It's how we consume it, and it works well for us. We don't have a lot of churn issues in places where we have the domestic soccer leagues. If you sign up to watch the Premier League in Canada, it's a 10-month proposition, right? So you maybe have a little bit of people who might pause for a month, but generally you would just sign up for the year and consume the whole year. That's not how boxing has worked in the past. Boxing in the past with a pay-per-view model has been a one-off sport, and we're trying to change that.
Yeah, and I found it liberating as a host. I mean, imagine for an actor, everything matters is about opening weekend, box office gross, how we doing. So for Jamie and I, linear television, it would simply be, what did the show rate? Are the ratings up? Can I get the ratings up, et cetera. Whenever I've asked Jamie now on ChangeUp, like, how are we looking? He's like, great. And I don't know how many people are watching, and he might know, but he's not going to tell me because he goes, it's really immaterial. Because to his point, what we're driving right now is awareness. And if you get awareness, people understanding what DAZN is, and the social value is huge. We had Bob Costas on the show, and Bob Costas, Scott Rogowski, my partner, who's really funny. He's so smart. He's a comic who did this show, HQ Trivia, which was an app, and basically he's one of these guys. Again, it speaks to Jamie being an outside the box hire. I would be somebody who I think would be very conventional. Classically trained sportscaster, went to school for broadcasting, worked at ESPN 9 years. Who's Scott Rogowski? He's this New York comic who had an HQ trivia thing which blew up, and then he was on Colbert, and now he's going to do a baseball show with me. I'm like, okay, sure. And when we had Bob Costas on, Scott asked me, when did you realize, like, hey, you're Bob Costas? Like, when was that moment? And Costas said, well, I know. And I said, listen, you've got like 27 Emmys. Like, you don't have to be humble. And Bob says, no, I tell you the moment. He said, my kid ran in and said, Ludacris just name-checked you. And I naturally said, who is Ludacris? And he said, he's this rapper, you got to hear it. And then Bob actually did the rap. I can't remember the exact specific, but something about smoking with Rastas like my man Bob Costas. So he says that, and then we have a great social media team, so boom, they put that on the DAZN app, and of course I retweet it, and Scott does. And the next thing you know, a couple blogs pick it up, big lead, et cetera. Now you got 500,000 people who saw it. So that to us is a home run. It's not Jamie tell me, hey, this many people watch it. So no, that Costas rap got 500,000 views. That's great pub for us. That's great awareness. Now people know what DAZN is, et cetera. So that's an interesting way that you're now evaluating how we're doing.
Absolutely. It falls into those three buckets, right? There's some things that are meant for awareness, and some are meant for acquisition, and some for retention. The one thing that we didn't discuss yet, of course, is our most recent big play in the awareness category, which is Pat McAfee, a daily show that I know you've been on, and you've been a big fan of Pat's for years. Pat is a unique host with strong opinions. He was a punter in the NFL for the Indianapolis Colts. Then he worked at Barstool. He's more than a talent. He's really almost a small business owner. He's running his own operation out of Indianapolis. And we partnered with Westwood One Radio. So the way that deal worked is Pat has a daily radio show on Westwood One, and then we stream the video content on DAZN. Primarily, we give away most of that video as well. The reason that we're in business with Pat is because of his megaphone, right? That Pat, on the week of the fight, has DAZN guests on the show. Pat will be talking about boxing. And also, frankly, people love Pat, and there's some sort of value given to DAZN because we're in business with sort of this beloved broadcaster. And to sort of similar to ChangeUp, the value of that is awareness. Do we hope you subscribe to DAZN to watch him exclusively? Sure. Of course, that's a future world that we want for everything. But primarily right now, the goal of that show is awareness.
And to Pat specifically, I mean, he's a guy who, again, it's interesting. We've used the word disrupting and outlier. But again, what we're doing with DAZN is we're actually partnering in many ways with those conventional sports networks. Pat McAfee is on ESPN programming. He's on DAZN, on Get Up every week, which is their weekly show, daily morning show with Mike Greenberg. He does Thursday Night Football with Adam Amin and Matt Hasselbeck. So we're actually, it's interesting. We're disruptive within the space because we're not a cable outlet, the way ESPN, Fox, et cetera would be. Yet, we have personalities who are working on those platforms, and basically one hand scratches the other. So when they're introducing Pat McAfee, they'd say, you can catch his radio show on DAZN, and here he is on ESPN, et cetera. So I think that's interesting, too. It's not like where Netflix comes in and says, all right, we are changing the game. We are going after Warner Brothers and Paramount, et cetera. We're going to mess with your model. In our case, it is different, and yet it's also symbiotic in some ways.
Yeah, we're in a lot of ways, we're teammates as well as competitors, right? And I think it's both smart business, but I think it also sort of reflects the spirit of John Skipper and who John is. And he specifically in boxing, we talk about this all the time. People say, like, oh, when Fox has a fight or ESPN has a fight, are you rooting for it to fail? Why would we root for it to fail? We want boxing to succeed. We want more people to fall in love with the sport. When we see their numbers overnight, we want them to be high. That rising tide will lift all of us.
Yeah, Brian Kenny, in fact, who does a lot of stuff for DAZN, he just called the fight on Fox. So there's another example of a guy who's a DAZN personality, but also working for another network as well. Thanks so much to everybody here for coming. We had a blast talking about DAZN and what we offer. My last thought as we close, Jamie really is the real life George Clooney and Up in the Air because his frequent flyer miles are off the charts. How much are you traveling right now? What are the miles at right now? Just give us a goal to set for those of us who want to be world travelers like you.
I serve at the pleasure of DAZN.
Thanks so much,
Thank you guys.
Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.